There have been calls for urgent changes to the rules on elderly drivers. This follows the death of a woman called Kathleen Fancourt in Chichester in September 2021. Kathleen was crossing the road on a mobility scooter when she was hit by a 95-year-old motorist who ran a red light. The driver has since pleaded guilty to dangerous driving. The senior coroner in the case, Penelope Schofield, has raised concerns about the lack of checks on elderly drivers. In a letter to Mark Harper, the Secretary of State for Transport, she wrote, "While drivers over 70 are required to apply for a new licence every 3 years, there is no requirement for there to be any form of medical check to confirm their fitness to drive." And the case highlights the danger of somebody having a driving licence when they are no longer safe to be behind the wheel. For many older people, being able to drive is key to their independence and freedom. Being told you're no longer safe can be a massive blow, especially if you don't think there's anything wrong with your abilities. But perhaps you've had to have that conversation with an older relative. Have you become concerned about, let's say, mum or dad's driving, and you've had to have the difficult conversation? How do you tell them they've got to hang up the car keys? Do email your comment and your phone number to vine@bbc.co.uk. Text us on 88291, or you can WhatsApp us on the long number 08000 288 291, which you should only have to input into your smartphone once. Rob Hurd joins us, the chair and founder of the Older Drivers Forum. Tell us about the forum, Rob.
Yes, so the Older Drivers Forum I set up in 2013, and it's about helping and supporting mature motorists to really carry on driving safely for longer, but also identify when is the right time to retire from driving.
And do you think close family members are in a good position to judge?
Yeah, I think they really are. They often will see things going on. They've often got those early signs. They've maybe seen a new scrape on the car, maybe some over-revving of the car, maybe excess using of the foot brake, all these little changes that they might see. And I think what we want to encourage people to do is have those early conversations with people about their driving before it becomes a danger or a problem.
I notice one thing that sometimes happens is that the son or daughter has a child, and they become obviously hyper-conscious around safety, and the first conversation is, "Mum or Dad, we don't want the child to be driven by you."
Yeah, and that's a very, very difficult one, isn't it? When they think that they've brought up that son and daughter themselves, and then suddenly they're not allowed to get involved in that as well. And what I'd always say to people, you know, the vast majority of older drivers are perfectly safe. I mean, they often got a wealth of experience, confidence and tolerance. But we do know as we age, our sight, hearing, reaction times and judgment speed aren't always as quick as they used to. So it's always good for all of us to have a bit of a brush up of our skills, a bit of like a MOT our cars. It's useful to MOT ourselves, regular eyesight tests, brush up on our driving skills.
And I know you, when you were a policeman, which you were for 30 years, had to deal with road accidents, and some of them were caused by drivers who were just too old.
Yeah, and that's exactly why I set up the Older Drivers Forum. Unfortunately, I dealt with a terrible collision back in March 2011 before I retired, which involved a retired GP driving the wrong way down a dual carriageway for over a mile. He was blind in one eye, below the legal eyesight limit in the other, but he thought he was fully fit to drive, but unfortunately had a collision with a 28-year-old male and brought about his early demise. And that really, you know, brought my highlight that there must be something that we can do. So that's why I set up the Older Drivers Forum, about giving a support network to older drivers, but also support to family, friends and interested parties as well, about how we can help and support them.
And the rules at the moment are every 3 years after the age of 70, every 3 years you've got to renew. But you're very much self-certifying, aren't you?
Yeah, so at the age of 70, a few months beforehand, you'll receive a letter from the DVLA or your licensing authority asking if you wish to renew your licence. And then it's a series of questions that you go through, asking about a number of medical conditions, about sort of 12 medical conditions. Have you got them? In fact, there's about 180 notifiable medical conditions, so we all need to be aware of those. And then it will ask if you can read a number plate at 20 metres. But it is a self-certification system, and something which I'm in the National Older Drivers Task Force, which would help advise the government on this. And one of the recommendations we're pushing for as well is compulsory eyesight testing at the age of 70, and every 3 years at least when you renew your driving licence thereafter.
How do you handle the conversation, though, if it comes down to the fact that technically your relative is able to drive, let's say Dad, but you want to say, Dad, we don't think you should. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think this is something you always have to not jump into. You need to plan, and the timing has to be perfect. So one of the way we always look at it as a bit of like a three-stage process. So the first thing is to try and identify in the family who's the best person to talk to that loved one of yours, because you may have different clash of personalities. So find that caring person who can talk first. Then it's about identifying when to have those difficult conversations. And you can actually start that early. Introduce things a bit like topics that are going on. You know, rather than it being a sudden thing, you could say, well, have you seen that local police awareness campaign? Or how about putting child seats in a car? Have you talked about that? Have you seen that collision that happened? You know, talk about things early to get those conversations going. And then really, ultimately, coming up with what is basically, what advice are you going to give them? What are you going to support with them? So often it's not about stopping driving. It's just making sure that they are safe. And there's lots of advice and support we can do to encourage that.
Thank you very much. Rob Hurd, Chair and Founder of the Older Drivers Forum. We're asking whether you have had to have that conversation in your family. Now we're talking about how to tell your family member they can't drive or they shouldn't drive anymore. Jean Allen in Essex, you had to be the bad cop on this.
Yes. Hello, Jeremy. Yes, I did.
And this was your aunt, was it?
Yes. She was showing signs of early dementia, and a friend took me aside and said, I'm sorry to tell you, Jean, but when I'm in the car with your aunt, I'm quite scared.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if she had dementia. So was she drifting across to the other carriageway?
Yeah, well, she'd go round a corner and take it very wide and end up on the other side of the road and not self-correct until her friend said, Bear, you've got to get over the... Right, so, yes.
That's hard. So what did you say to her?
Well, I first of all spoke to her brother, my dad, and he said, yes, it is rather nerve-wracking. And I said, Dad, we've got to do something. And I did speak to her, and she was just not her normal self. She was a gorgeous lady, but she was not her normal self. And she said, who told you this? And she was very defensive and basically didn't agree with me.
So then it gets into a bit of a trial of strength, does it?
Well, it's a trial of conscience, because I thought, if I know and I let her carry on and she kills someone, it's as much my fault. So I reported her to the DVLA. Yes.
And what do they do?
They sent her a letter saying, we've had a report, you can't drive, you're going to be assessed by your GP. I did tell her I'd done it.
Yeah.
She was okay, still defensive. She went through a long process, and I wrote a letter to her GP saying, look, this is what's happening, she's showing these other signs. And do you know what? She passed the physical exam.
Oh, which means the mental exam as well, so the whole thing. Right.
Well, I don't know what he did, but he passed her fit to drive, even though he had my letter. And so in the end, I thought, right, I'm going to steal her keys because I can't live with myself. But fortunately for me, because it took so long, quite a few months, she lost her nerve, you see.
Right.
So I didn't have to, but that was my only option left.
Thank you, Jean. Lots of people, I'm sure, have similar situations. John Maudsley in Tarporley, Cheshire. Now, you're 73 and you're still bombing round race circuits, are you, John?
Yeah, I'm still racing after 50-odd years.
And the point being that we shouldn't set this by age. A 92-year-old can be perfectly safe on the road.
Yeah, it's about competency, and if you're a competent driver, it doesn't really matter what age you are. And I think it's a bit easy to say that anybody over 75 or less can't drive, but they could be perfectly competent. And maybe some of my racing pals might disagree with my competency on the track sometimes, but I reckon I'm a reasonably competent driver. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's worth saying there was a story maybe a week ago where a hotel in Bath, which had a kind of outer, almost a little moat round it, so the walls go down to below pavement level, and then there's a gap between the hotel and the pavement. Somehow a car flips and goes down the gap, so it ends up on its side, 6 foot, 10 foot down, with its roof pressing against the side of the hotel. Now, when you see that story, do you think there goes an old age pensioner, or do you think there goes a 19-year-old?
I think there goes an incompetent driver.
Well, I went straight to a 19-year-old, I'm afraid, and I was right. So That does make your case for you, but you're too polite to say it.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Denise Pring near Bridgend, hello.
Hello.
Your father, bless him, had dementia.
He did, yes, for several years.
Okay, and he was still driving?
He was still driving. He thought he was a competent driver, safe to be able to be on the road, and didn't understand when the consultant said to him, obviously you can't drive anymore. He took that as like, yeah, whatever, and carried on driving.
Dangerous, very dangerous, because then if he hits somebody, you could have all kinds of legal trouble.
Literally, he managed to blow out both front and back driver side wheels by hitting a bollard in the middle of the road, and still didn't see that as being a problem.
So Jean, who I spoke to earlier, said I was on the verge of taking the car keys. What did you do?
Literally, I spoke to the GP, the consultant, the DVLA. The DVLA told me that obviously, as I didn't have power of attorney, that's all I could do was just fill in a form and make a complaint. Tried to take the keys off him, and obviously he got quite aggressive, threatened to call the police, who then said obviously I had no legal right to be able to take the car, impound it, because obviously it wasn't my car, and I didn't have power of attorney, and he, in all senses, was able to drive. He had a driving licence. Your hands are literally tied. You know, when someone's got dementia, it should be an automatic ban.
Yeah, I can see this thing of, it's, what is it, data protection, you can't ring up about another driver. Well, you know, there's possibly lives on the line here.
They're literally, you know, how we didn't hit anyone is a miracle. Literally, and I used to literally dread every day. I would never get in the car with him. I banned all my children getting in the car with him.
How did it end then, Denise?
I managed to... The GP had started having a lot of interaction with my father and realised actually he wasn't of sane mind. And when I spoke to him and told him that he's still driving and I'm at my wit's end, he rang the DVLA, who put a flag on the car. And the police then pulled the car over to check who was driving it, and had realised that obviously it was my father. So they impounded the car.
Right.
And obviously then he wasn't able to be able to go out and buy another car, because obviously he didn't have enough savvy to be able to do it.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. That's actually very public-spirited of Denise as well. But poignant, isn't it? Life moves on for us all. Sue O'Connell in Cheshire, your dad is 90 and you had this conversation.
Yes, I have.
Oh, it's really sad, all this, isn't it? Because you go back 20, 30 years when they were in their prime and you'd never see this happening.
No, not at all, and it's not a very nice conversation. It's quite upsetting, actually.
So what was he doing in the car?
Well, he was going out and then within about 10 minutes coming back home and saying, I don't know where I'm going.
Okay.
That's how it started. And so eventually, after about... I said to him at the very beginning that he should have give up his licence and his car keys, and it was like, no, I need the car, I'm independent. And then after the third time it happened, my mum was in the car and he was taking it to an appointment, and they ended up down the motorway, going down the M6 south, and he didn't know why he was going on the motorway.
Gosh.
So we had the conversation, myself and my sister, with him, and just said, we need to take the car off you, to which he said no. And after about the third conversation, I said, well, if you don't give the keys to us, then I'm going to go out and buy a clamp and put the clamp on the car.
Right. How did he respond to that?
It was a few choice words, and you can't do that. And I went, I'm your daughter, and I love you, and I don't want you in an accident, and I don't want anybody else to get hurt because you're on the road. He was quite defiant, and I said, well, I'm going out and buying a clamp if you don't give me the keys. And he reluctantly gave us the keys.
Thank you, Sue. Amanda in Devon, not your real name. Your father had a series of accidents in his own driveway.
Yes, he. I I sympathise with all the conversations I've been hearing. I really identify with them. Yes, he reversed one car into the other and wrote them both off on his own driveway. He had a bad accident reversing into his own garage. He damaged all the wing. And another time he came home with the wing all smashed and he couldn't remember where he'd done it.
And did you take the keys?
Yes, we took the keys. We had an enormous family row. But before then, there's been a lot of toing and froing with letters to the DVLA. I reported him to the DVLA. I sent them the doctor's letter, and they still sent him for an eye test, which he passed, and they issued him a licence. I took the letter to the police station, and they got they were very kindly got the county road traffic police to come and visit him at home and give him a curbside eyesight test where they measured it out in front of his house, took him out the house, and he read the number plate beautifully. So the policeman said, I can't take your licence off you. The policeman came in the house, had a cup of tea, and he said, look, be a gentleman, he said, surrender your licence. You're 96. The time's come. And during the conversation, my father was very compliant, but after the policeman left, a few days later, he didn't want to know. The last time he had an accident in his garage and smashed the wing, I did take the keys off him. I said, I've had enough. This is it. Because neither I or my mother would go out in the car with him.
Yeah.
And during COVID, he didn't drive because they were all on strike at the DVLA or go slow working from home. So his renewal didn't come through for about 18 months. So he stopped driving, and I thought, this is it. He's going to stop now. But then he got sent another licence, and he started driving all over again.
So he's still on the road now, is he?
No. He has asked for his car keys back very aggressively and said he's not going to drive.
OK, thank you. Debbie in Shropshire says, my father had a stroke a year and a half ago and thought he could get his licence back. His eyesight had deteriorated. His memory was affected. Because the thing is, it isn't just about eyesight. That's what we're realising. Having good eyesight doesn't mean you're a good driver. Having bad eyesight does mean you're a bad driver. And Debbie says his memory was affected by his stroke. At the traffic lights on red, as a passenger one day, he took off his belt and he tried to get out the car because he thought he'd arrived. He categorically thought he was fine. I had to go behind his back to have his licence removed. It seems that if you go to the DVLA or the police, and they will take action in some cases. John Healy says, I think they should be allowed to carry on till age 75 and then take a seniors driving test. Alternatively, they could be given the option of a free, decent mobility scooter paid for by the government. Just one more. Andrew Drury in Formby says, I'm a collision investigator and I've seen the effects of older drivers involved in collisions, and I advise both my parents to stop driving in their 80s.